I'm going to show you how I made my Ransom Note T-shirts, but this is not the coolest thing about what I'm showing you. This is one of my very favorite upcycling techniques, which you will immediately have all kinds of other ideas about what you can do with it, so it's just going to be mind-blowing creatively. And I have a couple examples we'll be looking at, but I thought it'd be fun to do one together. We're gonna do this shirt, which means nothing to me because it was not my trip to Disneyland. So we're gonna cover this whole area up. Now I know technically what I'm doing, but I have no idea what we're doing creatively, so let's find out. So this is a really easy project once you know what you're doing, but there are lots of gotchas that if you don't know about them, they can kind of take the easy out of it and make it no fun. So I'm going to share all my little secret workarounds and stuff like that so that you have fun doing this. And this starts out with your choice of shirts that you want to use. To begin with, this shirt fits me and it's in great shape. All these shirts came from a clothing swap, and heavier weight t-shirts with less stretch are way easier to sew than the ultra soft and stretchy rayon type fabrics. So I scored this sort of faded t-shirt. I really liked the sleeves on it, but I thought the faded pink kind of went with that gritty Ransom Note theme. And then, just because I love soft, stretchy garments, which are much more prima donna to work with, but me and soft, stretchy fabrics are like this. Let's time travel forward for just a minute. If you get a shirt that's a little big, that will make it way easier for you because we can just cut open the sides. Cutting versus seam ripping. Cutting is way easier. And that makes it so it can be flat when you sew your letters on. So much easier. Flat versus rumpled. And then sew things together again. You're going to lose about an inch when you do that, so it's not good for shirts that are really snug. This shirt is great in terms of how sturdy it is to sew, so instead I'll show most of my pitfalls to you on one of my rayon shirts. However, I do like having as much room as possible in the hips, so I don't want to open up the side seams, and I'll find another shirt to show you the joys of sewing on a flat surface. And one final tip is it's so much easier to work on your shirts if you take them off first. So I'm going to do that so we can have a look at this on the table. We also need to think about color story and what letters we need, right? So there are two different approaches to this. One is go out and see what letters you have and make words from those, kind of like Scrabble. Or decide on what you want and go looking for shirts that have that. Now, the second one is what I recommend if you have an infinite amount of time and patience. And the first one is what I recommend if you want to do a project today. One and done. So I like to see what letters I have, and I'm not good at Scrabble, so I do use ChatGPT for this. Here's another thing that can help you with getting all the letters you need, which is you can make some. And I am completely willing to fudge any missing letters.
Flip that M now, it's a W, chop up an L, hey look, it's an I. Snip the tail off an R for a P, old letters, new life, give it a try. Cut out shapes with a bold hand sew, trace it out in thread, let the sand stitch glow. Ink it with a stamp or paint it on free, or use a little stencil for a crisp marquee. Letters for patches or wild collage scenes. Any word you dream, you can stitch what it means.
My triumph was short-lived because some of my letters were so small that they were getting kind of lost in the image, so I framed them up with some bigger and more colorful backgrounds. And then I started to see even more problems, like wow, some of these are just curling up on me. Not only are the letters curling up, but it's also really hard to cut them very accurately. Like the inside of a curve with really floppy fabric is so friggin' hard. This is a great time to talk about the magical power that comes from sticking a second layer of fabric onto your letters. This just means that there's something making it a little bit more sturdy so that the needle doesn't jam the thread down into the bottom and cause sewing problems. And we're just going to glue it onto the back of the letters that we want to cut out. This is not fabric glue. This is just an ordinary glue stick. Glue stick! What? I know this totally freaks some people out because glue stick is not a traditional sewing technique. This is a hack. This traditional technique would be interfacing. But this is not a single purpose, expensive, made out of plastic, wrapped in plastic, $10 sewing item that you don't have on hand. So I like this better. And along with our glue stick, we're going to look for a little piece, some piece of woven fabric. So that just means something that's not stretchy that we can cut up and use on the back of our letters. Glue stick and fabric, that's our interfacing. And just be careful not to get it on the ironing board. Oh, right, the iron. Let's talk about this. The flatter things are when you stitch them together, the easier and the prettier that they turn out. So the iron is the main tool for making flatness, which is steamy goodness. In this case, it dries and sets the glue. Do not skip the ironing. Oh shoot, look at that. This is a good time to mention that a lot of the letters are going to be made with plastic coatings that will melt onto your iron. Since we're using glue and we've got melting plastic, I kind of doubled down on the pressing cloth idea. That's the technical term for what I'm doing here with these two pieces of paper or like a paper towel or whatever you have on hand. Fabric actually does work best. And what we're going to do is we're going to glue down this whole area before cutting it. Let's look at it side by side with one that doesn't have a backing. And you can tell which is easier to cut. Joy! All my letters are prepped. Wait, they're not all really prepped. Because in the case of the ones that I invented, or the ones that I put frames around, I need to sew the small pieces onto the bigger pieces. We always work from small things to bigger things. Now I have all my letters and I'm ready to look at the design, right? There are lots of moving parts, so I'm not just gonna start sewing them down because what if I run out of room for my words or something? So first I want a background that's gonna be big enough to cover this whole Planet Hollywood logo. I tried this gray out and it was too subtle for what I wanted because the blue letters were just sort of blending in. So then I thought, well, what would it look like with orange? And I loved the way the orange popped against the blue background. But now my red colors were kind of blending in. How about some white strips, like one for each word, as if the words were getting kind of cut out. And none of the backgrounds will blend into it. So I had that idea and I tested it out with paper. Oh my gosh, I love it so much. Let's have a happy dance. Well, I think it looks good and we're ready to sew it down. Traditionally, people use pins for this. I do not like pins. They take time, they pucker up, and they hurt me. So I got my glue stick handy. Why not? That's my very favorite for a temporary hold. Now, if you're going to do a lot of maneuvering at the sewing machine, like if you didn't release those sides, or if you're sewing this by hand, which is a lot more handling of the fabric, your glue is just going to come out. It's not going to be strong enough. So you really do need to use pins in that situation. But if you're sewing flat under the machine, this is a great hack. Again, I use my iron to set the glue and make it super flat. And it's time for some creative decisions.
Stick it, stitch it, pin it, flip it. So many ways to make it legit. Cut it, press it, punch right through it. Do what you want, just don't glue it. Wanna let the edges fray, leave it raw, that's that why slay. Or grab some zigzag, she's okay. Keep it crisp in your own way. Zigzag stitch, stretchy flex, perfect when you're sewing. Knit, satin stitch, thick little line. Wraps those threads, makes it shine. Edge it neat, fold it under, sew it close. Slow stitch wonder. Wanna go punk, stick it in the seams, snipple clips, chaotic dreams. Snap on rivets, grommet wild, weird fasteners, got a style. Hand stitch slow, got the time, that's high effort, extra prime. But there's one rule, and I mean it. If you're listening, don't glue it. It globs, it stains, it won't behave. That shortcut won't be the way. Stick it, stitch it.
Personally, I like raw edges for a ransom note, so that's what I'm going to show you. So there are lots of things that help with knit stitches, and you may not need to do any of these, but you're probably going to need to do at least one. So it's good to know about all of them, right? So first of all, I put a knit needle in. That's a ballpoint needle, or you could get a jersey needle if you're specifically working with jersey fabric. Sometimes it makes a difference, jersey needle versus ballpoint. So those are both like, they have a little round tip and they push the fabric apart. Now, I'm going to sew all of my letters onto these smaller backgrounds. And this is going to make it easy because when I'm sewing these letters down, it's going to be like this instead of sewing all of these letters down like I did on the pink shirt. One more trick with sewing. We start sewing and we see, whoa, it's still jamming in the machine. Okay, this is my favorite one. There's something called stabilizer. This just means anything that sort of makes it a little stiffer so that that fabric doesn't pucker down. My very favorite choice is recycled paper. The smaller stitch you use, the easier it's going to be to rip this away after you've done it. Okay, in this demo, I want to make just a few key points. First of all, I drop my needle in when I start. I also make sure the area before the presser foot lays flat. Even if it's only 1/2 inch, you want the area going right under the presser foot to be super flat. Another tip is when you're getting close to the corners where you're going to turn, hand crank that wheel. Make sure that when you corner, your needle lands on the outside edge of what you're sewing. Even if I have to sort of lift the needle up and oonch it a little bit to get it there, that's how I get nice clean turns. Another big gotcha to look out for is don't accidentally sew through the other layer of your shirt. So I'm constantly checking to make sure there's nothing under there other than the letters that I'm trying to sew through. And you have a choice. You can either back tack or overlap 1 inch for your knot. The last point I want to make about sewing this is when you encounter the plastic and rubber letters, sometimes they grab a hold of the presser foot and the top layer doesn't advance through. I just use a little scrap of paper to make that glide. Be real careful you don't catch the edge of the paper in your stitch. I mean, the great thing about learning on this project is that all the mistakes you make kind of add to the charm. So this is a wonderful beginner project, even though there's a lot to it. All right, it's time to see what we've done. Let me show you the striped shirt. In fashion design school, they taught me that good design work includes both the front and the back. So for my striped shirt, I turned it backwards and used the design element of the zipper in the front and have the surprise reveal of the ransom note in the back. With the pink shirt, I added some paint splatters on both the front and the back, and then I appliqued flowers on top of that. And I also added a little Day of the Dead kind of face down here at the hemline. I think it turned out really fun. And here's the shirt we've been working on. Hours of sewing, and I am so excited about how my pieces are coming out. This one, the message goes from the front to the back, and on the back, I also put a little rubber band in just to give my waistline a little bit of shape since the shirt was so boxy. And here it is, super fun. This is also a great technique for patching, but if your fabric is too thin underneath, you might do all this work for nothing. So please check out my video on how to patch severely ripped jeans.